if you come from a world where you watch the news and you watch EastEnders and you read the paper and you absorb that sort of stuff, and then you come across someone who is, isn't it a great day when it's raining, and that's okay that we missed the bus or whatever. For them, even though they're not doing it to kind of cheer you up, that's just how they are, that's how they see it. It can have a negative effect on that other person, and I think they got irritated with her for that. And I've had that experience myself.
Hey, Kalimnios, how you doing, my friend? I'm excited to chat with you this week because I've been listening to some podcasts. I've been talking about a particular subject that I know nothing about in terms of your opinion on it. And I want to have an explore today about this particular term, which I'm hearing loads and loads at the moment. And for some reason, it's triggering me. And I want to fight the elephant in the room. I've sent you a 2-word text to say, can we talk about this today? Yeah, I'm excited to see you. I've got a bit of energy for the discussion. Welcome, listeners, back to the Mindful Past podcast. But before we get into that, Howie, how you feeling? Good to see you, buddy.
I'm feeling very hot right now. I think it's the hottest day of the year as we record this. And I'm in a slightly different orientation in my room. I've been doing lots of shuffling about in the office as I prepare for move of items and things as my mum starts to kind of move her things in. We've exchanged on the house, which is great. So we're going to have all go. So I'm been working very hard the last few days. The other day I racked up 65 flights of stairs without being outside the house in more than a single story house. It's crazy. So I'm doing good. And that's why I'm sitting down, because I've been on my feet for the last 3 days. So I'm sitting down for this podcast, but I'm doing pretty good. It's good relief actually to have exchanged. So I'm feeling good. We're going to get it all done. How about you? How was your...
I'm good. I had a weekend in Bristol. My daughter had an exam. She's just done a week's worth of work experience in my office. It was great to have daddy-daughter time. This weekend, we're doing our trek for charity. We're trying to raise some money for a Costa Rican project, which Eve is going to be involved in. So we're planning our trek across Dartmoor, weather pending, for this weekend. So we're going to spend lots of time together. Work experience was great. I cycled to Bath from Exmouth just to get to her exam. I thought I'd meet her there, thinking it'd be easy. 140 kilometers. I've done that loads of times before, not a problem. I completely bonked. True. About 105k in, I had to get off my bike and have a 10-minute rest. I hadn't fueled properly. I thought it would be much easier than it was. It was 1,500 meters of climbing. And you know what? The last 40k was hell. I had nothing left. I was granny gearing it all the way in. All mindset over anything else because I had no strength left trying to finish it. So it was a bit of a wake-up call that my training is nowhere where it needs to be. But hey, sometimes the world is set up to test us.
The fact that you go, I needed a 10-minute break after 105 kilometers. People listening to this will be like I am, thinking, yeah, well, that's pretty impressive all the same. Did you presumably get a train back then?
I Lucy drove separately to put the bike in the car. There was no way I was cycling back. I was dead on my feet, dude. I was really, really struggling, and it was a real wake-up call that the first time I've been on my bike in nearly a year outdoors. Obviously, I train a lot on the watt bike indoors. You don't get a feel for the road terrain, the wind resistance, the headwinds, the hills, it was. I felt great up to 80 kilometers, and then wheels well and truly fell off my fitness.
I don't think I've done. You know what I was doing today? Actually, I'm clearing up the room, and I found the jersey that you made in 2015 for us for our cycle trip with all the things on it. And I was thinking, and back then I used to go from like year to year without training and be fine with things, but I haven't really been on a bike like that since 2000. The last one I went to, I think 2017 or whatever it was. I think you did the UK one in 2018. I kind of only made the last night of that. So I haven't really ridden for 7 years. I'm thinking, except for maybe like a 20k here or there, like let alone, I think we did, up to 100 miles, 120 miles one year, that Barcelona year. That would be brutal for me now. So I'd need to get back in training. If we do
just
another
goes
one,
to show you can't just rely on residual fitness after so long. It starts to fade.
Well, after a certain age as well.
Well, also true. Now I'm in my 40s. I think the other thing today, I had a really great conversation on my other show, the HR podcast, HRLND podcast, with a guy called Binny Candola, OBE, all about inclusion. He's a qualified psychologist, and just a really fascinating, interesting conversation, all about where potential lives on the other side of your fear, really psychological safety. Fascinating conversation. So it's been a good day so far, and I think that's probably given me some energy for today's chit chat. Which
good.
as I said, it's triggered me. And the words that have triggered me are the words toxic positivity, which seems to be going around in some of the podcasts I've listened to where people are talking about these terms. And I'll be honest, I don't get it. So maybe I'll start with my feelings on my understanding of the term. And, I might well alienate some listeners here because there may be people that feel like they are, on the receiving end of toxic positivity, that it's really impacted their mental health. And for those people, I welcome your feedback. My understanding of the term is toxic positivity is the pressure to remain positive and optimistic in all situations, which can often therefore lead to an invalidation of genuine emotions, especially negative ones. Now, you and I have spoken a lot on this show about the idea that no one can make you feel anything, right? So you could say something to me and it's how I decide to contextualize that information, and it's me that ultimately chooses how I feel. So I kind of struggled with that a little bit in the first instance, and that was the first thing that got me. I'm going to do some exploration here. I've listened to 3 podcasts on the subject. And then there's the thing of, a good example was a particular individual, and one I listened to, had been in a car accident. She was a physical trainer, a PT, and she'd broken her arm. And people had come up to her and goes, they were saying that it could have been worse. And you could have broken your leg, you could have been killed, could have been this, that, and the other. And she said that when people made those comments, it made her feel worse. Now, I can understand that it can make you feel worse because potentially they're invalidating the feelings of you and your broken arm and your ability to work and those things. Fine. But my concern here is, and guess what's triggered me is, how far do we go with this? When even if you're being positive, you could effectively still be doing the wrong thing. I'm worried that in the future, we're going to be ending up Googling what we can and cannot say in any situation. So Harry, you have an accident or something happens bad at work, you get made redundant, whatever it is. And before I can genuinely just come in with what comes naturally of saying, how are you feeling? How are you doing? Like you and I lost our dad. Someone says, how are you? Now, I know that the words, how are you, when I lost my dad, is a triggering thing for me to hear. It might make me emotional, particularly after he'd just lost him. That doesn't mean I don't want people to inquire. I don't want people to feel like they can't ask me the question. They need to go on Google to say, is how are you an acceptable thing to ask? I think we're at risk here of just overcomplicating human language to a point where we can't even show natural empathy. It becomes orchestrated. It becomes robotic. We start Googling and going back to our devices to understand what we can and cannot say for fear of upsetting or invalidating someone's feelings through positivity. The idea of even combining the 2 words of toxic positivity, I think, is an oxymoron in itself. And it triggered me. I've got further thoughts, but maybe that's a good place to start. So, I don't know where you are with the term or your feelings on it, Harry. But
I'm just, it's kind of a bit of a new term to me. So as I understand it and the way you've explained it and what I've just briefly read up on it, it's not so much the person themselves who've experienced the event being positive about the event. It's then relaying that to a second person. So something's happened to me and I'm down in the dumps about it. I engage with you and then you're trying to make me feel more positive, as opposed to something happening to me and me ignoring my own emotions and driving to make it a positive thing, right? So let's just be clear on that. So if that's the terminology that we're looking at, that it's someone else's excessive positivity thrust onto another person to make them feel differently, there's a few holes in all of that, right? Because one, then you as a person being positive are trying to change someone else, which we all know you can't change anyone else. You can only change yourself. So it's a little bit of a redundant point from that person. Now, I get what they're saying, because we've talked about this before, where the reason we've got, let's say, and let's say we've got 1,000 different emotions. The reason we've got 1,000 different emotions is so that we can experience those 1,000 emotions at some point, and we have terms for them. Not because we can just experience the ones we want to experience and discard the ones we don't want. So yes, we do have to have that emotional roller coaster, as it were, or not roller coaster, but it should be a bit of a smoother wave, where you have the positive times and the sad times. And I think by someone who's overly positive coming in and saying, well, yeah, it could have been worse, could have been this, that, the other, it takes away from them experiencing the proper pathway they're supposed to be going through. it's interesting because we have had those situations in the last 6 months where we've both lost our parents. And I remember, and I've talked about this, I'm sure, before on the podcast, but even on the day that my dad died, but all of us, we do our daily gratitude list that we've been doing for 5 years now, where we write 3 things that we're grateful for, and we send it to everyone in the group every night. And we didn't miss a day. And we all shared bits of gratitude. Now, of course, that's not taking the pain away. But even my mum, right? And because we're doing this 5 years, it's kind of, maybe it does change your mindset. It changes your mindset on how. So she was saying, look, well, at least he died in his own home. He died with the woman he loves. I was holding his hand to the end, And yes, it frigging sucks. Yes, it's like the worst thing that's ever happened to her. It doesn't stop you just because you experience the negative. What I'm saying is, it doesn't mean that you can't experience those positive.
I agree. You expressed that with me, right? You expressed it with me. I lost my dad, and your words were on live on this show, and I think I said something similar. At least you were with him when he left. For me, that's not invalidating my feelings of losing my dad. Similar to me.
Well, this is what I was going to say.
I'm glad that your mum was with your dad at the end. Now, that's, if I'm saying that as an air of positivity. It's not, for me, it's not me making you feel or trying to make you give a superficial approach to a distressing situation. It's a friend showing support in the way that I know how, because I can't delve deep into your mindset in that moment. I have no way of understanding how you feel in that very moment. But what I can do is try and help find a positive in what we all just understand it's a difficult and emotional situation. I think some of the terminology that's been associated with the term toxic positivity concerns me. Some of the words of other podcast hosts I've been hearing responding to those who've talked about their experiences is, toxic positivity makes people feel isolated. But it doesn't make you feel anything. This is the point I'm struggling with, and I can understand why it could invalidate a particular feeling in a particular situation. But loads of things can invalidate a feeling in a particular situation. What I don't want is for you necessarily to remind me in my dad's situation of how terrible it is that I've lost him. I want you to say, and I want to support you through it. And but even if you did, that's okay, because I'm going to have to confront that myself anyway. I don't think it doesn't make you feel anything. And I do think that one of the biggest problems we have at the moment in terms of mental health is because we do suppress our negative emotions, right? Now, and I argue that would be one of the arguments for toxic positivity, which I understand. If we're always doing positivity, we don't acknowledge those thoughts, so therefore we suppress them, we push them back down. But at the same time, you're not making me do that by being positive.
Yeah, I mean, a few things on that, and I totally agree with you, right? Because the emotion that someone feels is up to them. They don't realize it's a choice, but it's a choice. But I also understand that a girlfriend I had years ago, the one I was with for quite a long time, I haven't seen her for about 10 years, so I don't think she listens to the show, so it hopefully shouldn't impact her. But she was a very positive person, right, around people. And I think, to be fair, it irritated a few of my family, right? It's like, she's always like so upbeat, always. And it was almost like they were suspicious, right? And I think it's just different worlds that people live in, right? Because if you come from a world where you watch the news and you watch EastEnders and you read the paper and you absorb that sort of stuff, and then you come across someone who is, isn't it a great day when it's raining? And, that's okay that we missed the bus or whatever. For them, even though they're not doing it to kind of cheer you up, that's just how they are. That's how they see it. It can have a negative effect on that other person. And I think they got irritated with her for that. And I've had that experience myself where, because I changed the way I looked at the world, right? We've said this before, change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And I changed the way I chose to view the world, right? If I missed the bus, right? I'm like, okay, well, there's an opportunity for me to catch up on that reading or whatever it might be. And I used to say some of that stuff when I was around company. And I started to notice, and I'm talking probably 10 years ago, or maybe 14 years ago, I started to notice people kind of didn't really respond too well.
I understand that. Yeah.
And so I guess it came from experience, really noticing how to talk about certain things. And also I have this a lot with certain family members who do look at the negative quite a lot and will say things. And actually, rather than try and appease them by saying, "Oh, well, this, that, the other," I just stay silent. I let them
humans
ride
are
out
born
their thing.
with inherent negative bias, right? It's about survival. So I think the last thing I want to do is compound that by taking positivity out of the equation as well. I think positivity for me is one of the most positive, excuse the pun, words in the English language. I think it can do great things, and I think if used in the right context, it's a very powerful word. So the idea of putting that word next to a word like toxic, which I think has a very powerful connotation to the word toxic, it's a powerful word, potentially implies that positivity inherently can cause harm. And I think that, number one, it overlooks the actual complexity of human emotions and the human condition anyway, because we're way more complex than that. Our experiences are way more complex than just saying it's causing harm. Positivity is part of a healthy coping mechanism in many ways, right? So I don't like people linking it to the word toxic. But also, you and I talk a lot, and we've probably covered it a little bit already, how we have agency over our own emotions, right? That's no one else can make you feel anything. If three people say different things, someone I love says, "Nick, you're this," someone I've never met says, "Nick, you're this," and someone who I really dislike says, "Nick, you're this," they're going to make me feel three different, very different ways. And that's because of the way that I interpret and contextualize that from the individual that's giving it, right? So the idea then that the emotional response to positivity or toxic positivity in this context can damage me or invalidate me, I think suggests that actually what it does, the toxic nature of the term actually is his ability to undermine our own personal agency to the situation. It's to then blame somebody else for how we feel bad because they said this thing. It's never the person that said the thing. It's always because we're not dealing with the thing in the first place.
Now, I agree with you to an extent. Here's a couple of things. One, I think the word toxic there is just clickbait, firstly, right? So it's thrown in there. Yeah, it's headline stuff. And I totally agree with you that by putting the word toxic there, it implies, therefore, that positivity is bad for you or can harm you. On the one side, as we say, no one can make you feel anyway. And actually, it was interesting with your words where you said those three people, and you said, and they can make me feel three different ways. I was about to interject there and say, no, they can make you choose.
You caught me there because I'm speaking fast and my mind's racing.
But actually, our words
it's a fair capture.
Our words become our reality, our map of the world. And so, that being said, I've had these conversations years ago with a brother-in-law of mine, and not necessarily like that, but he would say something about that, and I would bring up, no one can make you feel that way, right? If you choose to do that because it's something I did or didn't do or whatever, that's on you. But I realised that that's a bit of a lost argument, right? Because people A don't get that, and B, although we are correct in saying we choose our emotions, we choose our emotional response, whether we're conscious or unconscious of it, based on the environment around us and what's happened. The reality is we often don't have the strength to choose the one that maybe serves us, and someone can say something and will make me choose to feel bad about myself. And so we don't live in a bubble, as it were, and we are affected, of course, by other people, right? We know this, right? It's like if your daughter comes and gives you a kiss. I mean, I had the sweetest thing yesterday, right? My mate who's over from America with his two sons, and I haven't seen them for a few months since Christmas, but they're like 7 and 10, and the 7-year-old is so cute, and he's always like hugging me, and it was about to leave, and it was like, so he gave me a hug before we went to the toilet, and another one after the toilet and stuff, and apparently he mentioned me a couple of weeks ago when they were having a big argument, like someone was having an argument a few weeks ago, and out of the blue he said, Uncle Harry, he would just tell us to like chill, and he would calm us all down, whatever. And it's like coming out of a 7-year-old. But the point is, we don't live in this bubble, and like that hug from that 7-year-old does evoke an emotion in me, right? Now I choose that emotion, but we are going to be receptive to the people around us. So it's both right and wrong to say we're not that we're choosing our.
So where do we draw the line? At what point does a nephew giving you a hug potentially compound the opposite? Because you're not ready for a hug, and therefore is not understanding. Whether it's a male, female, age, whatever. I'm using your nephew, he's probably too young to understand it, but maybe it's an adult hug. Well, I'll give you a hug because you've lost your dad. At what point is that me invalidating your feelings because you may not be ready for that? Because there's loads of things that this is my bigger concern about the idea behind it. And this is, I think, what probably triggered me overall. And I don't want to talk about why it's triggering. I want to try and give a solution, which I have here, and I'll be interested to explore it with you in a minute. I don't think you'll be necessarily aware of what I'm going to say, but I do think it's the idea that it can paralyze us from doing what ultimately is inherently what we want to do. And I think inherently it's typically the right thing, which is show support and show positivity. I'd rather hear positivity, even if it's, as long as it's meant well. As long as it's shown with the right intention, I don't really mind, for me anyway, I'm speaking from my own personal experience, if that means that they may be invalidating something that's deeper within me and how I'm really feeling. I think I want my friends to show that they're there for me, even if they're not fully understanding the depth of my despair or other problems that may be around it. That's just for me. It may not be for everybody, right? But I think there's a concern here if we start putting... and it is a clickbait word, right? But it's working because people are talking about this now, and people are getting, including ourselves on this show. Therefore, it's gaining weight, it's gaining momentum, and it worries me that it's going to paralyze people from doing the right thing, or people are going to be even more concerned about not knowing what to say, right? I think there's an alternative. I think there's a solution here, and I'm going to bring us back to Viktor Frankl. And I think rather than use what is a very powerful word like toxic with positivity, which I think is a really negative way of looking at it, Viktor Frankl talks about in his book, as you know, tragic optimism. It's understanding that we're in a tragedy by even putting that word first. But he embraces the idea that there's potential for personal growth and meaning, even in the face of the most severe adversity. And if anyone knows his story, he's a Holocaust survivor. We've talked about his book on the show before. He lost his wife and family almost as soon as they landed in Auschwitz. And, he had to find positivity in a very tragic situation. And he coined the terms together of tragic optimism. He recognized in his book that suffering is an inherent part of life. I think we all recognize that. We talk about that on this show. It's how we deal with it. And you and I have spoken before, the way we deal with that is to find purpose in the struggle, which is, again, something Viktor Frankl talks an awful lot about. If you have a how to live by, and then you can, a why to live by, you can deal with almost any how, right? Which I think was Nietzsche, which is the guy that sort of guided him through his philosophies in the concentration camps. I just think that's immediately a more positive way of looking at what I think is potentially the same problem in inverted commas. I don't know. I'd love to get your
I think it's slightly different, right? I think within Viktor Frankl, when he was talking about it, and it's been many years since I read the book, but I seem to think that was more of a self, the person on this. So those people that were like tragically optimistic, as he said, was like, oh yeah, we're going to be out by Christmas, we're going to be with our families by Christmas, or whatever it might be, right? Where they're delusional in their thing. But the point is, it was a optimism to oneself, right? It was delusional optimism in terms of it wasn't their reality, right? It's like me saying I'm going to win the lottery tonight, right? Even though I haven't bought the lottery ticket, right? I know I'm going to win. I know I'm going to win, right? One second, I know you want to say something, but I want to track back first to something I read in here, and I think there's a fundamental flaw with this concept anyway. So I'm looking up some sort of definition, right? Okay. However, toxic positivity is criticized for its requirement to feel positive all the time, even when reality is negative, according to this doctor. Right? The inherent problem with this concept is we assume that if a person is not in a positive mood, or whatever we think the person should look or act like, then they are somehow wrong, bad, or inadequate. The problem is when we invalidate someone else's emotional state, in this case, when we tell someone that feeling sad, angry, or any emotion we consider negative is bad, we end up eliciting a secondary emotion inside of them, like shame, guilt, embarrassment. Now, the biggest problem with that whole explanation is the word bad, where we say we consider the negative emotion bad, because the reality is, as we talked about, nothing is good or bad, right? So by us saying that emotion you're feeling is bad, is us creating our mental model onto
nothing
that person.
Means anything except the meaning we give it.
Exactly, because actually, grief, tears, being frustrated is good because it releases that cortisol, releases that stress, doesn't trap the emotion, etc., etc. So actually, by going to the positive and forcing that person to say, "Oh yeah, isn't it great?" that's the bad thing, right? Because the negative emotion, as it were, is the good thing, right? Is the thing cycle. So the point with all that is the whole premise of this is flawed, right? In my opinion, because it's neither good nor bad, right? Just thinking makes it so. But so that's basically could be a very short conversation podcast. It's just BS, the whole thing in my view.
Let me comment on your Frankl point. I'm not sure I fully agree.
Yeah. So I want to go.
I don't think it's just about self. Actually, I think that, and I'm going to use what you've just said there and relate, because I fully agree with you. Right, the labeling of the word bad is potentially where the problem is here. When we link that toxic positivity is bad, but the word toxic suggests that that's the way it's to be interpreted, right? So when we are positive, we then someone else can use the label, well, that's toxic positivity, and therefore that's bad, and that makes us feel a certain thing. My argument would be, if this is a genuine problem where positivity causes an invalidation of feelings, why do we need to create, or why has there been a term created that is so negative in connotation like toxic positivity? Whereas if we were able to use a term like Viktor Frankl's tragic optimism, we can reframe it more cleverly so that people aren't paralyzed by not knowing what to say. Instead, they can come up with a more creative and perhaps more in tune emotional response to a situation. So let me give a context. This is why I don't think it's all about self in my understanding of Viktor Frankl's phrase, right? So you and I both lost our dads recently. We talked about it extensively on the show. When I lost my dad, something that you could have said as an example, and using Viktor Frankl's theory, which I think is about giving a more meaningful context to a situation, right? He says, he encourages people to confront and process negative emotions and positive emotions and integrating them into a broader, more meaningful context. So if we take that in mind, you saying something to me, say that's tragic that you've lost your dad, Nick, and I feel for you, and we've got to try and stay positive, whatever it is that you've said. But it's saying something like, but understanding this is, of course, from your dad's perspective, is probably the order he would have wanted to go. Him first, son next, grandchildren last. For me, that's an example of giving a broader context to a situation. Would allow me to go, it is tragic and I feel desperate that I've lost my dad, but you're absolutely right. He would rather it went in this order. I still think he's gone too soon. I'm still tragically sad that he's gone. For me, that's an example of where you're able to understand it's still negative for me. It's still a difficult process, but you're still finding a positive in the situation without invalidating my feelings. But you're coming from a point of tragic optimism. I think those terms, for me, allows people to go, I understand it's a tragic situation, but there's optimism to be found, even in the darkest of situations, which is what Viktor Frankl was able to do.
Okay, I think in the case of...
It may not be the best example as first one came to...
No, I think it's a good example, but I think in that case, that example, timing is everything in this, because I don't think actually, when you're in that raw state, first day, first week, anyone really coming in saying, well, he'd have expected him to go, then you to go, then whatever else. In that state, I think it's just, compassion, empathy, not trying to necessarily tweak anything or bring that positivity in, as it were. I think you just let that ride out. So I think it's so context specific and so and time specific in how you do it, because by a person coming in and saying, well, at least it was this or that, this or the other, it is taking away that thunder a little bit. It's like when someone has a conversation, says, I went to France and for a holiday, and then the other person trying to connect and make them feel connected to themselves say, oh yeah, I went to France last year and blah, blah, blah. You're pulling that energy. So I think you just ride it out and you say, I'm so sorry that you lost your dad. I know it's a really difficult time for you and I'm here for you. And you might say, something like, I guess you'd say, it's great. It's good that you were all there with him, right? Rather than say, at least you were there with him. Something like that. I think it's a tricky one.
Context is correct in the way you've put it. But if I'd given, there has to be a level, I guess, of understanding that the people listening to this aren't sociopaths, right? And they're not going to think that the minute you lose your dad or you have a tragic circumstance that we should start bursting into song of always look on the bright side of life, right? I think there's a certain element of understanding and empathy and compassion which needs to come into play. However, if I was going into a room to see you and someone immediately spoke to me before you see Harry, make sure you don't fall foul of toxic positivity as the buzzword of the day, it would immediately potentially paralyze that individual. I'm going, oh, now I don't know what to say. I don't want to be too positive. I don't want to make him feel bad. And we end up paralyzing ourselves from being just who we are and having that natural compassion, that natural empathy. And one of the things we're trying to do at the minute is, I think, is to unmute voices, is to encourage people to say how they feel. And if they get it wrong, they get it wrong. The recipient needs to be open enough, vulnerable enough, brave enough to say, you know what, I'm not ready for that positivity right now. Well, actually, that doesn't resonate with me at the moment. This is where I am, rather than necessarily blame the person that's coming in with a toxic, in their words, a toxic attitude.
It's interesting because I'm reflecting back on my dad's funeral day and everything, and you know how sometimes in relationships or wherever it might be, you can criticize the person or whatever, but if someone else does, you want to defend them, right? And
for sure,
because they don't have the permission to do that stuff. It was a bit like that. I seem to remember like a few people. Like I'm thinking, I don't want it to be a really sad day, and I'm saying, well, you know, it's great that he lived a long life and he went the way that, you know, he didn't have any regrets when he died. But I do remember maybe one or two people sort of saying something like, oh, you know, well, you know, at least you know, he died, you know, in his own home with him. And I remember thinking, oh, actually, maybe I don't actually need to hear that from them. Like, you see, I can kind of say it and feel it, but maybe they don't. I don't know. And I wasn't like I was offended by them saying that. But I guess maybe it was that feeling of, yeah, is that too soon for that? I mean, actually, interestingly, I'm looking at the calendar, 24th of June as we record this. It's 6 months to the day since. I had actually a bit of an emotional bit before, not because I realised it was the date. I only realised that 2 minutes ago. So exactly 6 months to the day since his passing. But I'm doing a bit of decluttering. And I've got all these unused cards that I haven't, you know, they're still in their packets and never given them to anyone. And I saw one Father's Day, and obviously Father's Day was like last weekend or the weekend before. And so that kind of got me, because I'm like, I'll never get to use that, like, for my own father.
Yeah.
Right. Well, maybe I will. I'll write it maybe and give it to his, you know, the cemetery. But yeah, so. But I mean, something I want to circle back to, if I can, with the Viktor Frankl stuff, is that the what was the optimism word you said?
Tragic optimism is Viktor Frankl.
No, tragic optimism. So the thing that jumped out at me is a couple of things. One from my Vipassana meditation, and two from what I remember hearing from Tony Robbins years ago, and they're both the same thing. Effectively from Tony Robbins, it was see the world as it is, and not worse than it is, but not worse than it is. But also on the flip side, see it the way you want to progress it. And I think that was the same thing with the Vipassana meditation, because I remember I learned this lesson very powerfully, because I was in that meditation hall with hundreds of other people, and I just happened to be sitting, and you sit in the same space right, for 10 days. And I was sitting next to somebody, this old guy who had like the worst case of, you know, when someone kind of snorts in their nose and they're trying to clear and they go like all that, like that sort of stuff.
Yeah, cheers for that demo. That'll please the listeners.
Yeah, constantly. And, you know, note to anyone who's going to go and do a Vipassana meditation, definitely take earplugs with you, because you don't know what you're going to get. And I remember thinking, but I want, you know, how am I supposed to focus for an hour? Because some of the meditations you have to focus for an hour without moving a muscle. And it's really, really hard. How am I going to do this? How am I going to do this? And one of the lessons is like, see the world as it is, not as you want it to be. Now you could say, well, that's not great, because surely you should want to see it as a better way. But the first reality is see it as it is, right? Not as you want it to be. And this is what I say to my mum as well, when she was like trying to sell the house, or someone's not coming around to pick up a table now because they think it was too dated, and she's like, but why don't they like that? Like, the reality is not everyone's going to have your taste, right? You see the world as it is, right? You've got to make things the way that they want to see it, right? Not the way that you think they should see it. So see the world as it is, right? It's not going to be the way that you always want it to be. And so I think that is the point with the tragic optimism, is that these people who are tragically optimistic were not seeing the reality for what it is. Now, you can see the reality for what it is and still drive a positive emotion out of that, right? So that's where he survives. And I think those one that were tragically optimistic didn't, because from what I remember them thinking is that, oh, we're going to be released by Christmas.
I think actually I need to come in. I think your understanding of tragic optimism is getting mixed with what toxic positivity is potentially. Tragic optimism was actually not about being tragically optimistic, i.e. really optimistic. It's about understanding the tragedy that you're faced with and finding in a broader context and embracing the negative emotions. Actually is acknowledging the exact position that you are in and seeing you in real time, in the real place and time.
Yeah, but
that you're part of a bigger thing.
I thought that he had examples. Again, it's been years since I read it, but I thought he had examples of people who were convinced, like, let's say they were going to get released by Christmas and then didn't get released, and that's when they kind of killed over and died or something.
No, he didn't call. No, that's not where he referred. Well, that's not what he referred tragic optimism to. That's actually what he used as a case study to understand where they were not using it to their strength, actually.
So let me see if I understand what you mean by tragic optimism then. What? So see the world as it is.
Yeah, tragic optimism is about encouraging individuals to, excuse me, I've got some in my throat, to confront
and recognise the tragedy and then still be positive.
And then integrate them into a broader, more meaningful context. Viktor Frankl's all about finding meaning.
I think that's a bad term as well then, to be honest. Toxic.
Well, I'm not saying it's perfect. I think it's better than toxic positivity.
I think they're both. Yeah.
The tragic optimism is about balancing hope and realism. So it is about the realism piece. It's accepting that pain and suffering are unavoidable, which Viktor Frankl recognizes. And therefore, because they're unavoidable, we need to believe in the possibility of positive outcomes and personal growth, because that's part of the nature of the fabric of life. Is there are ups and downs, there are pluses and minuses, and that is the reality of life, right? So once we know that, it's easier to be more resilient, to foster resilience, because we understand that we can find meaning even in hardship. And that allows us
probably a better term
to find strength in difficult situations, right? Because we know that that's the ebbs and flow of life. So we don't just think, oh,
I think Stoic philosophy has probably got a better terminology for it. Because I think for me, tragic optimism is like is a different connotation entirely. But I think, regardless of what it's called, I think
you raise a good point, though, was what I wanted to say. And I think it links to what you were probably trying to say. And what we've talked about so far, only because this is the context that I've heard it so far in terms of the podcasts I've listened to and people talking about it. And so far, it's only been referenced and I'm sure there's hundreds of interviews I haven't heard, by the way, just to give myself a way out here. If someone goes, it's not all about this. So we've talked about people using toxic positivity towards another, right? So being overly positive when they're not, and therefore invalidating the recipient's feelings that may be going through hardship or whatever. There's also the context, of course, which I understand more, which is as an individual, as a self, we can be I don't like using the words together, but we can be toxically positive, if you like, in the sense that we try and remain positive and optimistic in all situations, and therefore we don't invalidate our own situation. I think that's not living in the state of reality. And in that instance, if we're suppressing our feelings or suppressing our subconscious, I can understand why that could be dangerous. If I've just lost my dad and whatever happened, or I've had an accident and the first thing I'm doing is, hey, everything's fine. I mean, that's just not dealing with my own feelings and not really allowing them in and pushing everything down into my subconscious. I can understand why that's dangerous. I still don't think that's the correct term to be using in this context. I think we can find a better way of reframing what that is. But I think in that context, I can understand why, if we're using toxic positivity, it could be harmful, because in that instance, it's me not validating my own feelings. I'm suppressing them. So taking it away from the context of you saying something to me and me thinking about it for myself, in that context, I can understand why that could be dangerous, because we don't want to be suppressing those negative emotions. We want to be letting it out. We need to make sure that we grieve. And if you lose your dad, you don't want to suppress that. You want to let it out. Not saying everything's fine. I'm fine. We have a human tendency to tell everyone, I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. And actually, that can be dangerous. So if we're using it in that context, I can understand its negative connotation. I still don't like the words toxic positivity, though.
Well, I think the word would be poor choice whether you went toxic negativity, there's toxic indifference, there's toxic whatever, because I think they all point to the same thing, which is someone like person A doing their best to imprint onto person B a way of being. I think that's why the word toxic would be put involved, because actually we're trying to inject into someone else an emotional state, a feeling, a state. Now, of course, we said before, right? The things that you do impact other people, right? I did some nice stuff for my mum recently, right? I cooked her dinner and breakfast and all that, and now she feels less stressed and she feels enjoy. Now, I didn't necessarily do that for those reasons. I'm not trying to elicit an emotion out of her. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do. But I think that's what my learning has been over the last 7 or 8 years, is to step back and not try to change anyone or anything, but do my own thing. And I think that's the toxic part of it, whether it's positivity, negativity, indifference, whatever, is that enforced will onto someone else to say, I believe that you should think about it this way because I've got XYZ experience. Think about it this way. And that's not going to work with the person.
No, I agree. And I think if we're coming from a position of self, a better word to use, if I'm being really positive, even though I've had a really difficult situation and I've lost my parents and hey, everything's fine. A better word to use in that instance is inauthenticity. Like, I'm not being authentically true to who I am.
Yeah, maybe that's it. Inauthentic positivity.
Yeah, I just think I don't know why that would ring true to me. I mean, you know what? I'm not being authentic to myself. For me, that's a more powerful way of reaching inside.
It's better than the word I was thinking of, which was delusional positivity.
Yeah, and I had to be clear that there are sociopaths out there like, I always look on the bright side, and there's a
and
that, right?
And that's the thing. I think so inauthentic, and I've been victim to that as well, where I've been thinking to myself, things aren't going so well, right? Business, this, that, the other, relationships, and then I try to spin it and be positive and go, well, at least I did this, and it's like, actually, you know what? I think I need to deal with that, because if that's creating the problem, let's say, I need to deal with that rather than, like I said, like Tony Robbins said, see the world as it is, but also see the world better than it is. But you first, to see it better and to get it better, you have to be reality of where you are now, right? And I think that's the thing, is that they don't see that. So, for example, a classic example, an easy one for people to understand, would be exercise, right? You doing your triathlon, let's say, in a few weeks' time. You're a bad example, actually, because you are already versed in that. But let's say someone who's 35, decided to do their first marathon, and they're tragically optimistic, and they're like, yeah, I can handle anything, I can do anything. But they're not looking at where they are now. They're not saying, well, actually, you know what? I haven't exercised in 20 years. I'm eating potato chips sitting on the couch. I haven't even bought a pair of trainers in 5 years. But I can do it. They're not seeing the world as it is. They're not seeing their situation as it is. They're just optimistic. And then they're going to have problems when they come to that marathon, right? So I think that's something that people have to recognize, is see the situation as it is, not worse than it is, not better than it is, just as it is. And then you can go and see it better than it is, or you can choose to see it worse than it is, which is the thing that most people do, right? That's I think where the people who are putting the toxic positivity are, is that I think people are seeing things worse than they are, and they're trying to pull them out of that.
I heard you mentioned the word bubble earlier, in how we feel. I think there's something that Dan Sullivan, who is behind, I think he wrote the book Strategic Coach, or does a strategic coach thing. He said a great quote, which was that the eyes only see and the ears only hear what the brain is looking for. I think that's right in that context, right? I think the way that you've worded it is interesting. But in your logo on your the Mind Gym is a yin,
the Thought Gym, the Mind Gym is a different company. Yeah, I'm actually might put it on the wall behind me, actually, but I've got one in print that's coming.
But again, if you think of the yin and the yang, there's the ebbs and flows of life. Like, we have to embrace the negative side of life as well, to have the positives. If it was always positive, we wouldn't know what positive was. That's the thing, right?
Exactly.
We think we would, but we only know the positive because of the negatives. It's embracing both sides. It doesn't mean it's negative. But it was interesting.
This is what I say. We live in a relativistic universe, right? Everything is only something relative to something else.
Sure.
You're only tall relative to short. You're only positive relative to negative.
Here's something I thought was quite interesting, and I don't think it's his because I think he quoted it when I read his. It was a while ago. Dan Sullivan. He's done a number of great books, but he talks about. I'm sure. I don't. It could be his. Maybe it's his. You might know better than me. He talks about the finite game and the infinite game. Right. So the idea being that a finite game would be playing a game of football. Right. So you've got rules. You've got someone else dictating, refereeing the match. You've got corners. You've got a winner and a loser, and all those kind of things. Right. When we look at life in that context, we can often feel like that we have won or lost at something, and therefore something is to label it is bad or something is to label it good. He says one thing that can really help individuals is to look at life as an infinite game where you never know where you are in the match. So yes, you have the negative flows and ebbs, and you have the positive ones. But you don't know yet how they're going to play out. So when you have that, someone's made redundant, it feels in ourselves like this is not good news, but then we suddenly find that we've moved on to a better position that is much more aligned with that, and we realize that was the best thing that ever happened to us. I work in recruitment, so I hear that more than ever, right? People feel like they've had really negative news and it turns out to be the best news they've ever had. We don't discover it until we play the infinite game. If we were playing the finite game and it ended at the redundancy, it would only ever be bad. It would be a losing position, right? So we've got to remind ourselves that in life, if we choose life as an infinite game, we don't know where the ending is. We just play. We play fully. We play all out, and we embrace both sides of the emotional spectrum, of the negative side as well as the positive side. Then none of it should ever be toxic. It's just we're playing the game all out.
The thing is, and I still don't think you've watched it yet. The What the Bleep Do We Know? But it doesn't.
No, I haven't. Example. I know it's on my list. Yeah. I've got to find the time. I don't watch much TV, but I will find a spot.
So the reason I bring this up,
I know you sent me the link as well,
is because in there it talks about higher dimensions and things like that, but it uses 2 dimensions as an illustration. And I think I've used this before, where if you're a 2-dimensional creature and you can just go forward or backwards and left and right, for example, you can't see the horizon, so you can't see where you're going. But if you're a 3rd-dimensional being like me, so if I'm looking at a table, let's say there's like a little ant, let's call it virtually 2-dimensional, crawling, they can't see the end thing, but I can see because I've got the overview of everything. So I know that they have to go through that issue in order to get to the next issue. And it's a bit like the very famous commencement, Steve Jobs 2005 commencement speech that you might have seen on
I've seen
very famous, where he talks about joining the dots, right? You can't join the dots until looking back, you can join the dots of what you needed to do, right? He needed to drop out, he needed to go to calligraphy class or whatever it might be. And actually, the other thing I wanted to talk about with commencement speech is that when you were talking about an infinite game, because we almost see like each, point lost in that game as tragic, whereas the talk that I saw recently was just a short clip on Instagram. I want to watch the full thing, but it was who's the tennis player? Roger Federer. He was giving a speech. I don't know if you saw that, but he was, again, a commencement speech, and he was telling the audience how, out of all his games, his career matches that he played in his career, he won 80% of all the matches he played. But he says, of all the points that I played, I won 54%. I was only just like a little bit better than lose. Like almost every other point I'm losing.
Yeah.
Right. And I still won at life, as it were. And this is the thing, is that we don't see, like, we might only need to win 51% of the time our points, right? And then we're going to have like 80-90% success overall. And I think we see each point as like the be all and end all. And I think that's what he's talking about with the infinite game, right? You play infinitely long enough, you do something long enough, you're going to succeed.
You're going to get a new perspective. I think that's the view. I mean, Michael Neal talks about the glass elevator of perspective, which is, coaching. He's a great coach, a world-renowned coach, and coaching is very much about raising awareness in the people that the coachee, if you like, so they can see things from a different perspective. And I think if you think about, he talks about the glass elevator. So at the moment, we never know what level you're in. Every individual rather is on a different level at any one moment in time. Sometimes we're very narrow we're at the lower levels. We can only see things one way, and we can't appreciate someone else's view. You know, we're late for something. We're not looking at the sunshine outside and beautiful weather. We just want to get somewhere. We've got a very narrow view. And other times we can go to the top floor of the glass elevator. And when you look that way, you appreciate everything. You're fully aware. You're fully in the moment. You're not worried about anything. You're just embracing the magnificence of the sunrise, right? How often do we sit back and look at how majestical and magnificent that is, right? And the unnerving nature of life and what we have that comes around and the unexplainable, right? Depending what level of the elevator we're on is the perspective we have, and that's about our level of awareness, which I think is wonderful, because sometimes now I'll think to myself, when I'm if I'm being narrow-minded on something, I'll think, what level am I on right now? Am I really taking everything in? Am I looking at this from just one perspective? Is this just because I'm in a bad mood, or because I got up late, or because that person annoyed me during the day? Or can I go up a level right now? Can I take a new view, a fresh approach? And it was Sydney Banks that said that your thoughts are like an artist's brush. You know, they create a personal picture of the reality you live in. And I think that's true. When we have that narrow mind,
I like that.
We have the artist is not as well accomplished as it could be. But when we are further up the elevator, we can have wide brushstrokes and create a wonderful landscape. And I just think that maybe that's helpful for listeners. It's helpful for me. I'm picturing myself in the glass elevator and wonder, if I got one more level, just one more level, how does that change my perspective right now? We brought a third member of this conversation who started talking about toxic positivity. I'm sure that my level of awareness to that term would probably change. If I had a fourth member who had a different experience with it, it would change again. So please, if you're listening to this and you enjoy what we're talking about, or even if you disagree with it, let us know, because it's from other people's, feedback that it might just change my level of awareness or my understanding or my picture or my view. And I'm very open to evolving how I see the world, and as I know you are, Harry, and I think that's the beauty of these conversations, right? It just allows us to see things slightly differently and explore.
Yeah, I think actually, speaking of Michael Neal, I know he wrote the book Super Coach, and there's the event that I usually go to. I don't think I'm going to go to it this year, the Mind Valley thing, because I'm too busy with the house move. But before the main Mind Valley University, I think would be an event that you might like. I've never been to, but they do a 4-day Super Coach event. So a bunch of coaches, so more focused on coaching. And that's probably more accessible to you as a 3 or 4 day event. And you could just duck over to Tallinn and do that for 3 or 4 days. But I think that starts probably this week, because this next week must start next week. No, it must start next week. It must be like next Wednesday or Thursday.
I'll let me take a look at it. I mean, Michael Neal was in London recently. I mentioned to you, didn't I? I couldn't make it down, which would have been a shame, because I'd like to have seen him. But
then let me know anything like that. You come to London and do something like that. I'll definitely be up for it. But I think,
I'm going to let's round the conversation. So we're nearly an hour in. For you, as you said, you had to do a little bit of research very quickly in terms of what it was. It's not something you've necessarily seen everywhere, but when you do some Googling, you suddenly realize the term is everywhere and people are talking about this. What are your thoughts for the listeners? What's your view now?
My honest thoughts is people just want something new to talk about. So it's a new shiny, it's a new shiny little term. My advice to the listeners is always go back to basics. Go back. Look at Stoic philosophy, right? Look at ancient wisdom. Don't get caught up on that. And also recognize that what we talk about, right? Nothing means anything except for the meaning you give it. Increase your level of awareness. So actually, if you are interacting with someone, I guess this is the advice for people. So let's say you are interacting with someone who is creating a mountain out of a molehill, or they've experienced something genuinely bad. I wouldn't go in guns blazing trying to turn that person around, because remember, that means that you are being delusional because you think that you can change another person, right? That person has to do whatever they do. So if it's too much for you to just be there and say, that must be hard, it's a bit like the advice I remember hearing about if a woman's got a problem, right? Men go in there trying to solve the problem, and actually what they really want is just to listen, right? Just to be there. I think in that video, I'm not sure if I talked with you about it before. Have you seen it? It's not about the nail. I think.
I've seen it. I've shared it several times. So I know it very well. It's actually, if you haven't seen it, it's about 2 minutes long. It's well worth it. It's quite funny.
It will save you 16, 20 years of learning about women, but just it's not about the nail, right? And so that's what I would say to people is go in there with compassion, empathy. And if you feel that actually that person is pulling you down because all they are is negative, and I think there was a really good story in the book, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, of two women who had both lost their husbands and jobs or whatever. And one, they both had problems at the beginning, but one went on to like just get over it and just deal with things and whatever. The other one just languished in that woe me pity thing to the point where actually friends then got annoyed, like always hearing that, and so they started to drift off. So then one is going down a downward spiral versus one was like, well, now I'm going to do the dance classes, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and they created a new group of friends. And so I would just say, if it's pulling you down, you're going to have to pull back anyway. Don't try and impose your will onto other people. Be there, compassionate, listen, and also don't get caught up on all the little clickbait term, toxic this and blah blah blah. It's just know yourself.
Yeah. Don't let it paralyze you from being who is intrinsically you. If you feel like you need to say something you think might help, say it. I mean, and if you're if you're coming from the position of self where you are being positive in spite of the fact that and in doing so you're suppressing how you really feel, then be mindful of what it is what you're thinking about, because just because we think something doesn't make us the sum of those thoughts. They're just thoughts. And I think we can get tricked by our mind of thinking that what we think is real, and it's not. We think things all the time. We're not a psychology in that regard. And I think I'll go back to Michael Neal. He always says people think they have a reality problem when in reality we have a thinking problem. And if we can control that, like, don't be afraid to show vulnerability, which is what this show is very much about as well. If you're not feeling positive, you don't have to show the world that that's how that's that you're feeling down. That's okay, because we don't know yet in the infinite game what that means. We don't know how it's going to play out, right? And that's the reality of it.
The thing I would say with that one, actually, because I agree with you, and at the same time, it's how you then demonstrate that. So I'll use it with an example. So if you're not feeling great and you say, I'm not feeling good, I'm ill or whatever, that might be true, right? And it also might be true that you're feeling better than you were yesterday. So you might choose to say, I'm on the mend, right? Or I'm improving. They're both saying the same thing, that you're not where you want to be. But one is saying, keeping you down. The other one is showing the arrow pointing upwards, really. And so your words, like we said right at the beginning, right? Your words create a reality, or the map of the world. Choose those words carefully. So it might be true to say that, you're not feeling 100% or you're not feeling great, but you might choose to say, I'm getting better, right? Or I'm improving, or I'm whatever. And that, I don't think is being overly positive or sticking your head in the sand, because it's actually looking at the reality. The reality is you may be better than yesterday, or whatever the thing is.
Whatever you are, it's okay. I think that's however you feel, it's okay. I think going back to probably a nice place to round it off for me anyway. I'm going to go back to Viktor Frankl's tragic optimism. However you're feeling, try and integrate those feelings into a broader, more meaningful context, and whatever that context is it's okay. Like it's some people are you could be the best, the highest. You could be Michael Jordan in the NBA, one of the greatest basketball players in the world. There'll always be someone who looks at him and views it negatively. It doesn't appreciate what he does, that wants to speak ill. So it doesn't matter, there's always going to be someone that's going to validate however you're feeling, whether it's positive or negative. There'll be someone there to conform or compound. So it's important we get that strength from inside. We need to create our wellness from the inside out.
You do you, basically.
You do you.
I would just say, you do you. That's it.
My wife says that to me a lot, to be fair. You do you, and I'll do me. That's usually when I'm telling her to try and reframe something.
You know what? It's good advice. It's good advice.
It's good advice. Yeah, she's a sage, is my wife. She's very wise. She's very wise.
Yeah, exactly.
She might be finishing in that context. Good. Well, Harry, I've enjoyed an exploration. It has changed my way of thinking about the terms. Yeah. Maybe it is just clickbait, but I just don't want people to feel paralyzed about being positive. And if it's you being overly positive, then look inward and challenge that, and just
see the world as it is, right?
Yeah.
And nothing is good or bad, positive or negative. Just thinking makes it so. As to paraphrase Shakespeare, as it were.
There you go. Well, we just finished an episode paraphrasing Shakespeare. That's
yeah. I added the positive, negative.
Podcast greatness, right there, Harry. There you go.
And that's probably the only bit of Shakespeare I know. So there we go.
That's good enough for me. Listen, really good to see you, buddy. I hope the audience have enjoyed this episode. We didn't know where it was going to go. I came in with some energy. I wanted to talk about this term I've been hearing. If you've heard it, if you have a different view, if you want to challenge what we've said today, if we've got it wrong in your opinion, let us know. It's absolutely fine. We won't take any offense whatsoever. You do you and I'll do me, and that's all okay. But let us know. We'd love your feedback. We're on Instagram. We're on YouTube, which is probably the best place to find us at the moment if you want to watch the live interviews. We've got shorts. You can find our videos on TikTok as well and Twitter. So, follow us. Give us a like. Give us a review if you can. Reviews really, really matter. So we'd be really grateful. They really help push us up the rankings. So if you get a chance, whatever your favorite platform is, if you can leave us a review, that'd be absolutely wonderful. And we look forward to bringing you the next episode of Mindful Pass real soon. That's me. Harry, anything you'd like to say?
Just thank you for listening and engaging with us, and also exploring this term with us. Right, it's a new term for me, and I think it's been quite insightful for me to explore it a little bit more. So hopefully, it's been valuable to the listeners as well. So please do share this with someone else in your circle. That would be great.